obviously was seen as something for the rich, not to be encouraged. That overhang is still there today, believe it or not, in some of the high taxes we have.
Let's go back a little bit before independence, because it's quite an interesting era. We had every car brands that we still don't have, like Plymouth and Dodge. They were all here thanks to imports, of course.
The feeling at that time was, I think, from the multinationals, a bit of arrogance that, we can give them little outdated technology because they've been used to, ambassadors, Fiats, Marutis.
A lot of these brands invested too much in terms of too many plants, maybe. They had sort of, I think, stars in their eyes, and everyone chased Maruti.
We've still not gone global. There's no Indian OEM or player which is as global as we could have been. Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Deep Drive powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. Now we have just celebrated Independence Day, and so on this podcast we are looking back at 77 years of the auto industry. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
And I'm Sergius Barretto. And Hormazd, before we look back at the 77 years, like you said, let's go back a little bit before independence, because it's quite an interesting era. We had every car brands that we still don't have, like Plymouth and Dodge. They were all here thanks to imports, of course. And, there's a small little piece of trivia. I don't know if you know, but which was India's first car plant or assembly plant, as it were?
It was a GM plant, wasn't it?
A GM plant, absolutely. 1928. We used to use that in GM, as a very proud thing to talk about when GM was here in India at that time and in the training programs.
Saying that they've come, they've gone, they've come and twice.
True. It's quite sad, actually.
Maybe they'll come back again, who knows?
True, you never know. Yeah, so that was the first plant. We had a lot of assembly. Ford as well, a few British brands assembling here. But then, I want to bring you in here and everything changed, right? At one particular point post our independence, I think in 53, why and how did that, what happened then?
That's right. And in fact, it's quite interesting you say that, because my great-grandfather, he was a car dealer.
Okay.
I found some old ads of his, at Queen's Road. He had his showroom in Bombay. That time it was Bombay, right, selling cars and importing cars. So it was a thriving business at that time. But as you said, after 47, after independence, the world just changed, right, in every way. I think clearly, the government at that time, Nehru, followed a socialist direction. And clearly, that's the direction we chose. It was a very regulated economy. There were planned economies. It was modeled along the Soviet Union at that time. So clearly, the idea was, to get India out of poverty. So you had to take this sort of direction rather than having a very capitalist, laissez-faire kind of way of, developing the economy. So clearly, planned economy, regulated economy, stifling controls. Slowly, cars obviously were seen as something for the rich, not to be encouraged. That overhang is still there today, believe it or not, in some of the high taxes we have. But I think, from 47 onwards, the controls were tightening. Firstly, the imports were banned. After that, you still had some CKD going on. Then after 53, you had the Tariff Commission. And by then, even CKD was also completely banned. You had to be manufacturing, and there was a handful of manufacturers left who could manage. There was Standard Motors, there was HM, Mahindra and Mahindra doing the Jeeps, and of course Premier with the Padmini. So I think that's really from 53 onwards. I think going on to
57.
57. I think by then everything was shut.
In fact, I think when the Tariff Commission's implementation, when they implement all of their recommendations, that's when GM and Ford literally packed shop, right?
Absolutely. They had to exit because, I think it was just untenable for them to kind of stay on. There was no business case at all. Frankly, they were just booted out by the kind of policies and restrictions and regulations that they were. So then I think, you had HM, which was there, it was founded in 42. All these the companies, Mahindra also, we know the story of Mahindra, how they kind of got Jeep, and, KC Mahindra met Barney Roos, and, they got the CJ down at that time. And Premier also, Walchand, Hirachand, so these were the industrial stalwarts of post-independent India. And I think they were the only ones who really kind of stuck on with the auto industry. And if you look at history right now, both Premier and HM practically gone.
Yeah.
And Mahindra and Tata actually have gone from strength to strength. So that's really a story in itself. Tata Motors at that time were doing locomotives, as we know. They started making trucks only in the 50s under a license from Mercedes at that time. So really they were in the truck business.
True.
And as we know, they got into cars much later. Yeah.
So almost as we did in the past, let's define these eras. So control age is what you could say the 47 to 57 was, right?
That's right. I would say, we'd like to say that was the control age. That was the age where everything was controlled. The whole economy was controlled, actually, not just cars, but that's just how it was. You couldn't get foreign exchange, you couldn't get technology. We were on this trying to be, become self-sufficient. That was the model we chose. But I think after 57, I think, the auto industry, it was just a handful of players and, with the models that we had.
And for far too long. In fact, if I don't know if you remember, but when we were discussing this, the next era, you called it the dark era. So we went from control to dark.
That's right. It was absolutely the dark ages, because if you look at it from 57 to
83.
Till 83, till Maruti came, you just had literally a handful of models you could buy. I mean, with Premier, you just had the 1100, the Fiat 1100, and we know how it evolved. It became the Padmini. The Ambassador, also Morris Oxford, how it evolved, and it became the Ambassador. And, it was a joke that the Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, you might have one different grille and it became a Mark 3. Absolutely no R&D at that time. Absolutely no quality control. Cars were of pathetic quality. They kept breaking down, especially an Ambassador. I remember going as a kid with, let's say, a wet cloth on the fuel pump, because the fuel pump, it was so close to the exhaust manifold. That was fine in the UK, but in Indian ambient, it was so hot, that you'd get vapor lock all the time.
Yeah.
So you had these kind of retrofitted electrical pumps, you had a kind of a industry which spawned with little jugaad to kind of make things work at that time. But really, quality was terrible. The dyes were old. The fit and finish was awful. The PDI would take sometimes a day and a half at the dealership just to fix things right to some acceptable level to give it to a customer after it came out of the factory. So really, it was appalling quality. And, a lot of people have a fondness for the Ambassador, but frankly, I hated the Ambassador. It was just horrible to drive. And going from second to third was an art, in itself, to kind of slot in over there. It taught me double declutching, because there was no synchron first gear in any of these cars. So that's what we did. And so I think really those were terrible cars. I grew up driving on an Ambassador and a Fiat and my dad's 56 Dodge, which was again an old assembled vehicle at that time. But, again, 56. So before, even CKD was shut at that time. So I think so. Yeah, that's how it was.
True. And what was, I think this was also because in, I'm forgetting the year, maybe 68, the Muralidhar committee, they kind of stopped acquisition of technology, right? And which...
That's right. The controls get tougher because, frankly, it was a foreign exchange thing. You had limited foreign exchange. Then finally we had the crisis of foreign exchange in 91. So we needed foreign capital because it wasn't working any other way. But I think, so really there was, to be honest, in fairness to a lot of these companies, they just didn't have access to technologies. At that time, even capacity was constrained. You couldn't make more than a certain number of cars. There was no supplier industry. I remember an interview with Kesarkar Mahindra. He's saying for about 2,000-3,000 cars, they had to make everything, every component of the car, which was just madness, to do it at that time. So I think it was really a different age at that time. And clearly, probably, from a motorist point of view, the worst possible time to, like cars, because really had no choice. And I remember at its peak in 82, just before Maruti came, the waiting period for a Padmini was 8 years.
Wow.
So a lot of people would do, I remember my father-in-law doing it. He'd buy his car and then immediately book one for, book the next one, because he knew he'd get it after a minimum of 7-8 years, and that's how long you kept your car until then.
True.
And so that's how it was. So really, it was the Ambassador and Fiat, these two cars, which really kind of was the private transportation for the whole of India at that time. Yeah.
And Hormazd, then let's move to the formative era, 1983, where Maruti came in.
Yeah, I would like to call that 1983 onwards, let's say 1983 to 1993, what we call when liberalization happened. In that time, I would say it's the Maruti Age.
The Maruti Age, yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, Maruti's story is amazing. We've talked about it before. It's a real fairy tale story. The way it happened, it actually happened out of
tragedy.
Tragedy, exactly.
Yeah.
Because after Sanjay Gandhi got killed in an air crash, his mother, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, wanted. He had started Maruti, as you know, as we all know, which was quite a failure.
True.
But she wanted to, in his memory, make Maruti a success, and that's how it all started. And I think, I remember an interview with Osamu Suzuki at that time, and he said he could feel the conviction in, the few times he met Indira Gandhi, the conviction in
to make it
voice speaking to her to make it happen. And she did make it happen. Normally you get red tape in this era, but they got a red carpet. So I think there were no hurdles. All clearances were given. And at that time, it was a total monopoly. And, Maruti had a huge, and I would say even unfair advantage too. Because everyone else who wanted to have some sort of collaboration, they were all rejected. Tata tried with Honda in 86 to make the Accord. They were rejected. Escorts tried with Citroën to make the 2CV. They were rejected. And there are many of these cases like that. So I think no one got it. Then you had, by 83, you had something called a broadbanding policy where you could make certain groups of cars. So that's when you had, Premier could get into some other products, if you, so could HM, Standard
and
came back.
They did try. I mean,
that's
Standard, the 2000, I love that
They
car.
came back with the 2000, but again, they were all hotspots, and kind of hybrid cars. Yeah, that's right. Because again, technology was, foreign exchange was very, very scarce and limited. So you literally couldn't buy the latest technology because you just got something at a throwaway price, which was old, discarded, and you brought that in.
Right.
So, for example, I think even Premier, they got the 118NE, which was the Fiat 124 from Seat, really old guys, so they got that cheap. And then they got the Nissan A12 powertrain, a very smooth engine and one of the best
gearbox.
Lovely gearbox, because that gearbox, it went direct. There were no linkages. The gear lever went direct into the gearbox. And really one of the best gearboxes. I think they got that whole thing for just 50 lakhs at that time, which was a throwaway price. Hindustan Motors, again, they got the Vauxhall Victor, and I think with an Isuzu 1.8 engine. So again, you had these cars. They were not very successful because, again, they were poor quality. They weren't very reliable. I remember doing a Himalayan rally route survey in a Standard 2000 where we had to raise the suspension because it was really low by putting, wooden jocks in the
Vanguard engine.
With the Vanguard engine, yeah. And honestly, we had an issue. The fuel pump failed. There was a lot of quite unreliable. But we did the whole route survey, and it was a great ad for Standard Motors at that time. So, it was, I think that's how it was.
True.
And this continued until, I think, 1991. As we know, the economy liberalized. And in 1993, the auto industry was delicensed. So I think 1993 really, in a way, is a very important turning point because it's the start of the modern auto industry where FDI was allowed. People could come in with 100% investment into the auto industry. And there was a huge kind of, the floodgates had opened and everyone and their uncle came charging in.
Exactly. Yeah, we had so many brands. I mean, right from the Japanese brands, Europeans, Peugeot. We had Peugeot here,
We had Peugeot here. So I think, if you look at it, everyone came charging in. And at that time, though they didn't need to, the thinking was do a joint venture because they didn't understand the Indian market. So they thought they'd tie up with a local partner. For a local partner, I mean, they were really scared. I think, again, Kesarkar Mahindra, I think in that interview, I'll never forget. I mean, he was saying that, they were really terrified. In fact, they asked the government, just don't open the floodgates completely, have some restrictions, how will we survive? And he says, thank God they didn't because, they had to raise the game. And it's an amazing story of how Indian companies today are so much stronger than even their partners. I mean, the whole, if you take the whole Mahindra Ford story, Ford came in with all their might, did a joint venture with Mahindra, and they've gone now.
Yeah,
Mahindra's become even stronger. So I think what was interesting is that how these foreign multinationals made so many mistakes when they came through. So Ford came with Mahindra. They got the Escort again. It was expensive. Didn't have the right engine. Didn't have the right features. And the feeling at that time was, I think, from the multinationals, a bit of arrogance that, we can give them little outdated technology because they've been used to, ambassadors, Fiats, Maruti, so we don't have to give them the latest. And I think there was a bit of that arrogance there. That's what happened with Peugeot, with the 309.
Yeah. Happened with GM, with the Astra, 3 engine changes.
That's right. The Astra also was an old Astra. And honestly, the Astra was just not fit for India. It was expensive. It was, not even reliable. Things like air conditioning, it had to be retro-engineered, which really didn't work over here. It wasn't a car built for India at all. It was a European transplant picked up and put here, and they tried to make it work.
I remember the first engine was a single-point fuel injection.
Yeah.
They upgraded that because it wasn't doing well to another single-point fuel injection.
That's right.
Went MPFI only with the third petrol iteration. So you're right. I mean, it was sort of...
Well, at least they had fuel injection before people had carburetors. I think... but again, all these, you had, let's look at the joint venture. There was Ford and Mahindra, there was GM and HM, there was DCM Daewoo, there was Toyota with Kirloskar. And again, Toyota, when they came in, which was much later in 2000, they came in with the Qualis, which was, again, to me, it was a very successful product, but just smacked of the arrogance of a company that they could bring such an outdated product, knowing that the competition was frankly something like a Sumo and the Armada at that time, or whatever, the Mahindra. So they knew that they were superior in that sense. So they didn't want to bring their best car. Then they jumped 2 generations when the Innova came. So I think that's the approach they had in India, and I think they learned some pretty hard lessons that, Indians are very value conscious and they don't want to pay, but they still want the latest and the best. Again, a classic example was Mercedes and Tata Motors with the W124. It launched in India when the next generation E-Class, the 210 came. I mean, was possible. It already shown. So this was how they came in, so from 93, all the multinationals came in. It was the last untapped market in the world. So everyone and the uncle was tripping over themselves. I mean, I remember at that time, it was an exciting time. We had all the CEOs coming in. We interviewed a lot of them, and, they were all fully gung-ho on India. Then I think reality started biting pretty soon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, almost everyone was gung-ho. I remember even Volkswagen, when they came in later, right? This thing carried on for a while that, India as this untapped market is going to grow like crazy. They came in saying, we'll have 20% market share. And the word you said, that arrogance, it was, almost, I mean, of course, what do they know? This is quality, we're going to have 20% market share, going to build a huge factory, a lot of capacity.
Yeah.
And a lot of these brands, I think they sort of invested too much. A lot of these brands invested too much in terms of too many plants, maybe. They had sort of, I think, stars in their eyes, and everyone chased Maruti, right?
I think that was the biggest mistake. You're absolutely right. I think a lot of them tried to chase Maruti because they thought, hey, Maruti at that time, I think Maruti at its peak had over 80% market share, maybe even more, because, it was the only one there. So they said, hey, we want a part of that pie. But I think, everyone kind of underestimated what Maruti was. And Maruti is an amazing story, actually, because I think, it's a car that, it's a company or the 800-footer nation on wheels. It developed a supplier industry, and really it it is in so many ways, let's say the backbone of private mobility in India.
Absolutely.
And I think, people may love it or hate it, and, talk about, about their safety record and things like that, which, obviously has not been as good as the multinationals, that's for sure. But, they've given affordable, reliable mobility to millions, which is what a lot of multinationals have been unable to do. Because they've been unable to price their cars correctly. And more than that, the quality of service, the cost of service, the cost of spares, just been nowhere near the ballpark of what Maruti is, been able to achieve.
Exactly. It was, in fact, our first car family was actually a Maruti van, the Omni. It wasn't even called the Omni then. And I remember my dad bought that because he stayed away from cars. We were fighting him to buy a Premier, Padmini, or an Ambassador. Our neighbors had them, so we obviously wanted a car. And he's like, no, just look at them. When they drive to Goa, they take the propeller shaft with them. I mean, literally, they had a propeller shaft as well, in case things went bust, and a lot of spare parts in the And he's like, that's not. But when Maruti came in, he was like, this is what we need to buy. It's reliable. I mean, you said it. And it really sort of removed not just price barriers, but I would also think, mental barriers for people in terms of...
It emancipated a lot of people. I mean, it kind of freed up people. Women started driving. They never used to drive before. The cars were so user-friendly. I mean, they never broke down. That was something, kind of really a novelty when you went on a road trip, because normally on a road trip, something's going to... The Padminis with their small radiators, they would always overheat. Then you had bigger radiators. And when you air condition a Padmini, the more problems over there, they'd overheat even more. Same with the Ambassador.
Correct.
Unreliability was a given at that time. But I think with Maruti, everything changed.
Correct.
And, and I think looking at when the auto industry opened up again, there was big change. And I think the consumers really won at that time, because really from having no choice at all, they had a kind of fantastic array of models. And clearly, I think, it was actually motoring nirvana at that time, and going after 99 when Autocar was born, actually, Autocar India was born. I think we really got into what we call a golden age.
Absolutely. I think 2000 onwards was literally the golden age, because the cars, yes, they came, and then everything else began coming into as well, like roads. I mean, you did the Mumbai-Pune Expressway.
I'll never forget that. Yeah. I remember we had that Mumbai-Pune Expressway to ourselves. We drove it in that MPFI 800, where we got that iconic shot of the Speedo, beyond 140. We've used that everywhere. It was an absolutely closed, empty road at that time before it was open. Very much the way we did Samruddhi, and also we used to do these road tests of big infrastructure projects back then. And I remember we did a fantastic story with a Lancer Evo 6 and an Alpha Spider on that as well.
Right.
So that was again an amazing trip, going over 200 at that time. So I think you had the cars and the road started coming. And honestly, at that time, the Vajpayee government, they really went hammer and tongs at the road. The GQ was built at that time.
Right.
The first time we had, a proper highway, it was, just circumnavigating the country. So the Golden Quadrilateral, was built around that time. So it was just amazing. We had the cars, we had the roads. The cars were not even that expensive. They were fun to drive. And, traffic wasn't as much as it is now. No speed cameras. So I think that was really motoring nirvana. And, I'll be honest, you didn't have cars that were kind of burdened with emission regulations, where they were throttled.
On the flip side, right, thanks to fuel injection.
That's true.
Yeah, they got faster.
That's true. With BS2, you had a whole wave of fuel injection coming in. And, we did a special, actually, remember, I think it was in March 2000, I remember that issue. We had what we called a fuel injection special. All the cars with fuel injection. And it was just amazing what fuel injection did at that time. It unlocked more power and it improved reliability dramatically. Everyone was worried, what if it breaks down, a roadside mechanic won't be able to fix fuel injection. But, that really wasn't a concern. So I think we have to also, factor in that emission regulations also kind of improved product at that time.
Correct.
Because the carburetor was effectively killed. So no more flat spots, the cars ran much more smoothly, more efficiently, and there was so much more power, because that's what fuel injection did. No carburetor could achieve that balance of, the air-fuel mixture the way fuel injection can. So I think...
Really the golden age.
That's right. Really the golden age. And also what we had at that time, which was again driven by BS3 in 2005, was the advent of the common rail diesel. So I think common rail diesel kind of totally transformed the kind of perception of diesels and the way diesels drove. I mean, diesels actually became fun to drive.
True.
I mean, I remember the first common rail we drove, it was with Shapur. He got the E220 CDI, the E-Class. And it was, one of those moments like when we drove the City VTEC for the first time. You just remember that, wow, I can't believe something like this exists. It was really a game-changing experience, So I think common rail coming in, and now it became across the board. So diesels really became, a lot more fun to drive,
transfer,
and let's say more efficient and smoother as well.
So yeah, and almost we have to discuss one thing that happened in this golden age, and I want your opinion on this, because 2006, while it was a golden age, we had this rule of the small car, the sub 4 meter come in, right?
That's right.
And that sort of, stifled choice for international manufacturers who came in here. So would you place this as a great golden moment, or how do you judge the small car tax?
Well, I think, it made cars cheaper. So I think, for argument's sake, if it wasn't there, the cars would have still been more expensive. So I think it made cars more accessible for, Indian buyers.
Perfect for our conditions also.
And perfect for our conditions. Frankly, honestly, from an industry standpoint, this sort of rule doesn't exist anywhere in the world. So, we are out of sync with what's happening internationally, and, a lot of global products can't align globally, which makes it difficult to come in. But if you look at it from a more holistic point of view, what our issues are, I mean, from a congestion point of view, it takes up a lot less road space. And today, you've got the three bogies of, let's say, cars, which are the three really, the bad things, which is emission, safety, and congestion. So this really kind of addresses the congestion issue to some extent. And that was the thinking around that time. Also, the thinking was to make India a hub for producing small cars. But I think now that's gone, because the world has moved on from small cars. No one makes small cars. No one wants small cars anymore. Everyone wants it.
India doesn't want small cars anymore.
Exactly.
If you look at the sales charts.
Exactly. So, I think the consumer has definitely changed, to becoming more aspirational and wanting more space. So, but really, I think that also brought in a new genre of cars. And I think, again, Tata Motors really at its innovative best at that time came out with the compact sedan, where they chopped the Indigo and made it sub 4 meters. And then you had every body style coming under 4 meters to get the tax benefit at that point.
Yeah. So clearly, I think it was a good move as well, right, for India. And from that golden era, Hormazd, we also, weirdly enough, moved a little bit backward into what you very often say now, the new regulation era, right? We've got the emission norms coming in post 2015. We had the crash safety norms. Cars, a lot of cars we lost there. We had BS6 coming in. So a lot of these sort of changes,
absolute
regulations.
So I think I would say the golden age for motoring was, let's say, 2000 to 2020, about 20 solid years for the enthusiast, and let's say for people who enjoy driving, let's put it that way. Let's not forget also in 2004, something very important happened. The ban on imports was lifted, right?
Yeah.
That was very important for people who could afford it. Taxes were still very high, but that's when all the Porsches, Ferraris,
you could import whatever.
You could Lamborghinis, everything could come in. I mean, and you can still import them, just by paying the duty. So before then, there was a ban on imports, and cars had to be locally assembled or CKD at least, and that's the only way you could get them in. So that again, I would say, is part of the golden age. Where you really had this proliferation of choice at that point. And again, I think you really had some fun to drive cars which we enjoyed, which had gone. I think some models which people forget were really were great. I mean, for me, something like the Subaru Forester, which came here, the Chevrolet Forester, outstanding car. Sold in very few numbers. Of course, the Icon, which was probably the most fun to drive sedan at the time, with that Rocam engine. And these cars didn't cost much at all. I mean, like everything was under 10 lakhs, 7, 8 lakhs. And of course, in today's terms, but even then, if you see the prices today, you factor in whatever inflation and things like that, they're still disproportionately more than what they were cost at that time. So cars have become a lot more expensive. And I think that's the whole thing coming into this post-2020 age, where we've done a story, so many good cars were killed. There's a lot more regulation, which has stifled choice. You don't get the same engine options that you used to. I mean, at one point, you'd have two diesels, two petrols in a model line. Right now, you might just have one engine alone, and that one engine, kind of supports multiple model lines. Like you'll have, especially with the small volume guys, you'll have a 2-liter TSI petrol for, let's say, the whole Volkswagen group.
Exactly.
Just one petrol and one 3-liter petrol. Just two of them handling everything. Earlier you had a 3-liter diesel, a 2-liter diesel. You had a V6. I remember the Audi A4 had a V6 as well, the 3.2 V6. So you had these hot engine options because it was easy to do at that time, given, the way you had to meet the regulations, not very costly to do. But now it's so costly to meet regulations for an engine, you can't give that, all the engines across all variants. So we talked about this in our choice going down.
Yes.
But more than that, I think, traffic has gotten crazy. And though our roads are also increasing and they're getting better, I think the quality of the roads is really, really bad. I mean, look at the Mumbai-Pune Expressway right now. It's just terrible, whether in terms of traffic, in terms of surface. In fact, I think ironically, on a really bad, busy weekend, it's faster to take the older road than to take the expressway today. So really, this is the situation there is right now. Of course, everything's going towards electrification, which is a different era again. But you've got the speed limiter warnings, 80 and 120. So it's a very restricted, very regulated kind of age right now, which we're getting into.
So Hormazd, clearly we've come right up to present times. But before we conclude, let's just look back at also the cars that defined our, 70 plus years of Indian independence. And you said something about the CJ. Would that be the first car in your, most iconic cars in India?
I think so. I think the CJ was an iconic car, car intended for military use, but it made so much sense, in a developing country like India. The roads were so bad, and I think, it really gave Mahindra its rural roots over here. So I think
the branded entity also.
Absolutely. I mean, it is. I mean, still people, generically call it a Jeep at times. So though
Stellantis won't be very happy with that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think so. The CJ was definitely something which is very, very part of the fabric of the automotive evolution in India. And I think then of course it's the Maruti 800.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think any car has had such an impact on the auto industry as
so you're going to skip straight to the 800. You won't mention the Ambassador, I know, because you don't like it.
I mean, they represented everything that was wrong with the auto industry.
Okay.
Bad quality of a regulatory age. It represented, certain draconian policies, the failure of planned economies. That's what it represented at that
Fair
time.
point.
So both the Ambassador and the Premier. I mean, they were just terrible quality cars.
So they were just there by default. It was not iconic. There's just no choice.
Yeah, I mean, Ambassador is iconic in its own way. I would say maybe more because it's everyone of any standing from politicians to taxi drivers. They all had an Ambassador, and obviously in that sense, and just the fact that it went on for so long, much longer than the Padmini. Over a 50-year span. Yeah. By that kind of lifespan alone, you have to give it some sort of status in the so it just went on and on and on. So I think the 800 honestly was the one that changed everything because it not only was a car, it kind of built the auto industry. The whole supplier industry, the way we know it today, was built. It didn't exist until then. Everything was vertical integration. The car makers made everything. But the whole kind of, the philosophy of a supply chain, it was really built by Maruti at that time. So I think that to me was a very important. And I think, again, two models which are very, very significant are both homegrown models. The Tata Indica, which I think was really an outstanding achievement because it kind of showed what Indian ingenuity could do, how it could fight back against the multinationals. Don't forget, I mean, you have to remember that all Indian companies at that time were just fledglings. They had no experience. After so many years of being stifled of technology, foreign exchange, international know-how, they couldn't access any global assets or resources. They just did this almost on their own. And I think that was amazing. I think what the Indica did is actually built a car company.
Right.
And in fact, Tata Motors passenger division was built on that. And, with that came the confidence to buy JLR. So one could say if the Indica wasn't there, maybe JLR wouldn't have happened. So, I think it's really, you can't...
Another landmark.
Absolute landmark. And then I think the other one was, for me, the Scorpio.
Right.
Which I would like to talk about at length in another podcast as well, because Scorpio was really a pivot moment for Mahindra, from going from a rural player to a modern SUV maker. And the fact that it still goes on, probably I think it's the most iconic Indian brand today. Then I think the Toyota Innova, which again is Toyota quality at its best, speaking, the kind of, just showing customers that, this is the car you can bank on. And I think everyone swears by an Innova. I mean, whether it's good value or not good value, they have phenomenal resale value still. And really, since 2005, the Innova has sort of set that template for reliability. So I think these are cars which are really, sort of defined the auto industry over the years.
Yeah. True. No, absolutely. I fully agree with the Innova as well, Hormazd, because I remember when they replaced the Koalis and the Innova came in, GM had the Tavera, and everyone at GM was like, they're going really higher up in the price. Tavera will be safe, and this is not going to succeed.
But actually, Tavera was saved by that.
It was, but because
though they had the emission scandal also.
True.
So
True.
I would say the other way, that if there was a thinking that if Toyota had the opportunity to keep the Qualis and the Innova, because they were two separate vehicles altogether.
They could have, yeah.
Yeah, they could have, because I think in that sense, the exit of the Qualis, the Tavera could fill that space because the Innova was so much more expensive as well. So, but again, Tavera was a fairly reliable car and also served its purpose. But I think Toyota, there's no price you can put on reliability. And I think that's what Indians love. And that's why, Toyota can get away with pricing it what it wants. That doesn't even have to give all the frills and fancy features and the latest touchscreens still today, because I think, as I said, that's the kind of beacon of reliability in India today.
Great. So, yeah, I think that kind of wraps it up, right, Hormazd? We've summed up the eras, we've summed up the iconic cars. Anything else do you want to look back into or look ahead to the next?
No, I think, it's been an incredible journey if you look at it. Just, I would say just 30 years of evolution. But I think, honestly, I want to end on something which is, I feel, a bit of a miss, that, we've still not gone global. There's no Indian OEM or player which is as global as we could have been. I think that again is because the market structure over here is still quite protectionist in the way the tax structures are. And, you have to really invest in deep local manufacturing to be cost competitive. Not many companies are willing to do that. You just got a handful of players over here. So I think in a way...
And it's actually gone backwards, right? I mean, Tata actually had a exports sort of business, even in Western Europe, in Italy. And
that's right. Like that. So I think it's, the world has changed. Obviously, the Indian market is huge right now. You want to serve that market and you're doing really well in that market. So I think, on the flip side, both Tata Motors and Mahindra in India are doing better than they've ever done before. But, they're still not ready to be globally competitive as yet. So I think that's the next step. I think that's what we need to look at. And once, Indian brands can be globally competitive, I think that's when our industry will have come finally have arrived. So with that, we end this very interesting podcast. I hope you found it interesting too, but it's always great to go back down memory lane. It's been a fascinating ride for the auto industry, and we'll have many more topics like this going forward. Thanks for watching. You can also catch us on Spotify and Apple. See you again, same time next week.